I spent most of my 20s working in construction. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. Hands-on work suited me better than the engineering degree my parents had always pushed for. Life was predictable until the accident. The Aldridge Group hired me as a foreman for their new headquarters. It was a dream job, great pay, benefits, and stability. But dreams can turn into nightmares fast. The foundation had barely been poured when the collapse happened. 3 dead, 13 injured, including me. No one knew who was to blame, surveyors, engineers, or just bad luck. But those of us trapped in the rubble blamed the company. Aldridge settled quickly. 6 figures to buy our silence and a desk job I could do from home. They even threw in a discounted apartment, fully accessible for the wheelchair I'd now need for life. I moved in February last year. The apartment was decent, spacious, accessible, but dark. The balconies above blocked most of the sunlight. It wasn't just the physical changes that hit me. It was the isolation. My life had gone from hard hats and boots to staring at a laptop all day. The days blurred together. Wake up, exercise, eat, pretend to work, sleep. Depression set in fast. The only sounds were my upstairs neighbors arguing and the old woman next door talking to her cats. Then came June, the hottest month I could remember. One morning after a shower, I noticed the power was out. For the first time since moving in, I rolled outside to check the breaker box. The air was heavy and still. No birds, no insects, just silence. As I flipped the breaker back on, I heard an argument upstairs. "If you won't fix it, I will," the wife snapped. I said, "Give me a minute." Her husband barked back. Their door slammed shut above me, a sound that would haunt me later. That was the last time I went outside for months. By September, my isolation felt unbearable. I hadn't spoken aloud in weeks. When I finally did, just to hear my own voice, it startled me. That night I cried myself to sleep. By October, desperation drove me to listen more closely to my neighbors' arguments and conversations. Their voices became my only connection to humanity. One night, out of boredom or madness, I started responding under my breath. When the wife yelled, "You never listened to me," I whispered back, "I'm listening." It became a strange game until something changed. One night, when she shouted, "For once admit I might be right," I whispered back sarcastically, "Why should I when you're wrong?" And her husband replied, "Why should I when you're wrong?" I froze. Had he just repeated me? At first I thought it was coincidence. Maybe their fights were predictable after all. But then it happened again and again. I started keeping notes on my computer, timestamps of every word they said. That's when I realized it wasn't just arguments being repeated. It was entire days. Every conversation was happening word for word on a loop. By November, paranoia consumed me. One day, desperate for answers, I wheeled myself outside for the first time in months. The courtyard was eerily still, no movement from any of the apartments surrounding mine. Every window had its blinds open but showed no signs of life. I sat there for an hour, watching, waiting. But nothing moved, not even shadows behind the curtains. Then suddenly, one by one, every blind in every window snapped shut. Panic set in as I wheeled back inside. My doorbell rang seconds later, a grocery delivery that appeared impossibly fast while my back was turned. For weeks after that incident, everything went silent. No arguments upstairs, no cats next door. It felt like whatever controlled this place was recalibrating itself because of my curiosity. When the sounds eventually returned, they were different, but not better. The cycle had extended from a single day to an entire week's worth of repeated events. One morning at exactly 9:13 a.m., the time when the old woman usually scolded her cats, I decided to disrupt the pattern by knocking on her door instead. The response wasn't what I expected. "Who is it?" came a voice, but it wasn't hers. It sounded stitched together from fragments of other voices, distorted and unnatural. The door creaked open slightly, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I didn't stay long enough to find out more. After that day, everything spiraled further into chaos. The routines became unpredictable. New voices replaced old ones. Even cars outside started moving differently, but always driverless. Eventually, I realized there was no one else here but me, and whatever it was that controlled this place. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, there came a knock at my door. Not the bell, an actual knock. When I asked who it was, my own voice answered back, "I'm your neighbor, from next door." I flung open the door with a knife in hand, but no one stood there. Instead, something shimmered in the air, a humanoid distortion stepping across my threshold toward me. In that moment, I made a choice: fight or flee into whatever void awaited beyond this facade of reality. And so, here I am now, telling you this story from somewhere far away from that cursed complex, hoping you'll believe me before it finds someone else.